Hey everyone, Nick Manning here. This is lesson 2 of my programming course for absolute beginners using the Dart programming language. So today we're going to cover variables, how they're used, the concept of a variable, and how you use them in Dart. So basically, a variable is a temporary holding place for data. Also, variables help us have our code more readable. So if we're using the same data throughout our application, we can use a variable to easily read that code and simplify our code. So that's what I'm going to get started showing you. And then we'll cover some concepts of variables and then a quick example of a e-commerce cart calculation and that's more practical so you could see them in action. All right, let's get started. So let's talk about variables in a very practical sense. So I said that they do two things. They store their temporary holding place for information, and they also make your code a lot more readable. So let's take a very kind of crummy example, and then we'll apply variables to that example to simplify our code. So if I have an e-commerce app and I just want to print on the screen, print i.e. Rendering something on the screen, showing it, painting it, if you will, on the screen. There's different ways of saying it. I can use the print function, and we used the print function in our last video. So I said print, I can do whatever I want. So in the cart calculation, and see below I get an error because I expect to find a semicolon here. So just ignore those errors at the bottom for a minute. So if I say print, let's say the cart subtotal is, and then what I want to do is do another print statement. And I can say the subtotal is 50, right? So remember, I can print a string or a number. It doesn't matter what it is. A string is enclosed in single or double quotations, and a string is simply a sequence of characters. That's it. Um, a number is something like this. It doesn't have single quotes. And lastly, to recap, remember when you need to run anything in dartpad.dev, you have to enclose it in a main function. So we talked about what that main function is in the last video, so I won't cover that. So let's say our subtotal is this. I'm going to run this. Usually there's a run button here. I've hidden it because it takes up too much screen space if you're zoomed in, but you can see the output here. Subtotal is 50. So let's use multiple print statements to calculate the rest of the cart. So let's say the tax is 4, right? And then the final total is 54. I'm going to run that. And notice in my application, what I'm doing with the syntax, I'm adding a space here, and that makes it more readable. I could also just have no spaces. I could just have all of these print statements one after the other. But sometimes if I want to make it more easy to read, I can just add a line break here. And that's what I'm going to do. So let me zoom out for a sec to show you the final result. So subtotal is 50, tax is 4, total is 54. Now there's a problem with this. So let's say I'm in my code and I want to update this final total. I want to update, let's say, the subtotal, right? Something changes about it. It's not 50, it's 51, right? So instead of changing the total as well, I have to change it to 55. I can use variables that make it much easier. So I'm changing code only in one place. So instead of doing that, let me revert my changes. I can declare a variable. And in Dart, the way we declare variables is using the var keyword. This is a special keyword, and a keyword is just a word or a thing that is recognized by the programming language that is like does something, right? So when the computer program executes this function, it's going to go line by line through my function, and if it sees the word var, meaning variable, and then a space, and then the name of the variable, so I'm going to say subtotal is the name of my variable. I can name it anything I want, and ignore those errors at the bottom. And then I do a space, then the equal sign. I'll get to that in a sec. and then the data I want to assign to that variable, and then a semicolon to end the statement. We covered statements in the last lesson. I've just defined a variable, and the computer program knows that because I'm doing var space some name space an equal sign space and then the value, it knows that I want to declare a variable. And this equal sign is called the assignment operator. An operator is a special character or characters identified by the programming language, right? By the thing that's interpreting your code, and it's going to do something. In this case, this is an assignment operator, which is a single equal sign. And what that does is any data on the right side here is going to get associated with the variable name on the left side. So it's almost as like you're assigning whatever's on the right to the variable on the left. So that's how you declare a variable in Dart. There are other ways to declare variables. There's one other main way, but I'm not going to cover that today because that's a little more complex and it's overkill for this example. But now that I've declared a variable, I can substitute this value of 50 here with the variable name. So if I run this, I'm not going to get any errors, and it's going to still print the subtotal. Subtotal is 50. And now when I change the variable value, I can change it to whatever I want, and it'll still show that value. Same thing with tax. So I'm going to say my tax is 4, and my total is 54. Now, in a real life situation, I'm going to not define the actual value of my tax. I'm going to define a percentage, but I want to just keep things simple because then I would have to go into other concepts and data types in the example. So just sit tight. It's a little contrived for right now. So what's off about this example, right? What I need to, I still have to update the total and the subtotal individually. So one thing I can do is have the total automatically calculated. I can just say the subtotal plus the tax is the total. And this is where we get into something called arithmetic operators. It's an arithmetic operator is using a typical arithmetic and a special symbol to do an actual calculation. So instead of this total here, I can calculate it by using the subtotal and the tax variable. So I can say subtotal, so total equals subtotal plus the tax. And this plus symbol is the arithmetic operator plus. It's an addition, right? And note that I'm using a space around it to make it look nice and formatted properly. So, and as I went through my last lesson, I noted that programming is very related to math, right? There's a lot of similarities to math in terms of programming syntax. So in math, you would write it out pretty much the same way. You would say total equals subtotal plus tax, okay? And finally, I can update my code below. I don't have to use actual values in my print statement. I'm defining the values all up here, all the variables, subtotal, tax, and total. And then my print statement is very easy to read. And I don't have to, if I want to change the subtotal manually, if I want to change it to from 50 to let's say 51, I don't have to change other lines of code. I don't have to change my total variable. I don't have to change any print statement below, right? So that's a very important thing to note, because when you're getting into writing, let's say, Flutter apps or Dart apps in the future, Flutter is using Dart. You want to keep your code as clean and simple as possible. So that's it for the example. I think it makes a lot of sense. I hope it does for you. I've declared 3 variables, and subtotal, tax, and total is printed below. So the last thing I want to cover is just some concepts, how variables are used by your computer. So remember when I said a variable is a temporary storage place for some data? The way that works is that all this data, 51, 4, blah, 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 when the computer program is running, it's storing the variables in your computer memory. This is the kind of like very bare bones diagram that I created on variables, and it builds off the last diagram that I had previously. So yeah, I'm a programmer. I have my code. This is my Dart code here, and the code is taken and the computer converts it into a final program, something that can run an executable file, right? But here I've created a box called computer memory, and all computer has some type of memory, and that memory is like human memory. It's temporary, right? When the computer's turned off, that memory is wiped clean. Or when the program shuts down or is stopped, that memory is erased, and so because the computer doesn't need it any longer. So when I have data from my variables and that data is changing, most of the time that data is stored in computer memory. Not all of the time. Those are called static variables, and static is another concept I can go into in the future. But for the majority of variables, all the data for them are stored in computer memory. So when this program starts up, it's going to read line by line all of these variable definitions and all the assignments of the data to those variables, and it's going to store that into computer memory. So that's just basically how variables work, where they're stored, and it's really important to understand that. Let's say your let's say your program is poorly optimized and it runs very slowly, or it crashes. That can be the case where your computer memory isn't enough. Like there's a limit to your computer memory. So that's why writing performant, efficient code is very important, and that's just like anything else in engineering. So that's a little bit of concepts, and then to summarize, I've showed you how to define variables and make assignments, and how they impact clean code, clean readable code. So that's it for now, and see you next time.